All right, my friends. Hey, greatly appreciate everybody jumping in today. I think we've got everything up and going, so we should be ready to talk a little bit about soil health and sensors and how these two actually are, in my opinion, they're created to work very, very well together. So again, I do appreciate you jumping in here. I know we've got a few more. I got a couple of messages from some people that are going to be jumping in with us here very shortly. But most of those guys know me. So I want to go ahead and share my screen right now, and I'll shut my computer off here, my camera off, so that I'm not distracted you there in that space. But I'm going to go ahead and shut my camera off, and then you guys can just pay attention right to the presentation. And I'll introduce myself. And then I also have a guest with us here today, a gentleman by the name of Randy Dar. And I'm going to have Randy talk a little bit here in a little bit as introducing himself, introducing his business, what he's been doing in the last several years in the soil health space, and how it's impacting some of the farmers that he's worked with. And obviously, we're going to be talking about water considerably in this conversation. But Randy's had an opportunity to work in irrigated, not non-irrigated ground. He's had a pretty big selection of different types of fields and different types of quality situations to work in. So let's just go ahead and dive into it here. Um, the technology platform that we're going to get to by the end of this event is a platform called Iris. And that's why we're here. That's our software platform. But today we're going to look substantially at some hardware also. So, the hardware component, you need to know why you're buying it. It's one of the things we talk about quite a bit in the technology space is know your why before you buy. And if you know your why, then you know you're going to get something that's going to be very, very valuable to you and very valuable to your operation. So, a quick introduction to myself. My name is Kylan Hunt, and today I'm very, very privileged to be a grandfather, a father, and a husband. And I got to tell you, raising grandkids or watching my kids raise grandkids is a whole nother level of love. It's a whole nother level of opportunity. And when I'm thinking about water and I'm thinking about the water space and I'm thinking about water quality and soil health, my family drives me. They motivate me. Why? Because what we're living on, this big blue planet called Earth, our job is to make sure that we can leave it better for them than it was for us. And we have been so blessed in so many different ways in agriculture to be able to step into this space and be very, very successful. And over the last 20 years, that I've been heavily involved in the technology side, I'm finding ways more and more and more often that I can do my part to bring in quality future for this family of mine. So, who is Kylan Hunt specifically? Go through this really quickly. Number one, I'm an executive director with the John Maxwell team. And the reason that I connected with the John Maxwell team is to get access to leaders. And this has been my goal and focus in business now for about 15 years is to really look at the business side of agriculture and see how we can serve and how we can help. And one of the things I noticed real early on is there's a huge need in our industry for great leadership. And I've also learned that leadership is developed because I even look back at my own history in the last 35 years that I've been in business and doing things that I've done. I had some failures. I had two bankruptcies, and it all came down to my lack of leadership and the way I believed and the things that I seen and the way I handled the situations around me. So having access to great leaders has been huge. The second component for me is personality and behaviors. And if you're in business and you're working with different people, even if you're a grower today, if you're a producer today and you're working with different people on your operation, maybe they're vendors that are serving you, they're retailers, or maybe they're people that are employed by you, I can guarantee you're working with different personalities and different behaviors. And we have to know how to work in that space, especially as we start to move into the digital world and social media. So that's really been a focus for me on who I am, but what do I do? In the last 15 years, I've focused real heavily on recruiting and development of entrepreneurs in agriculture. That's been my primary focus. And it's been heavily focused also in water, in the irrigated space. So that's been my niche, if you will, is the recruitment and the development of entrepreneurs in water and agriculture. So let's get to this event here today. But before we do, I want to have Randy Dar speak in a little bit. I just introduced myself. Randy, if you would be so kind as to unmute yourself and share with this group a little bit about who you are and what you've done in this industry the last 30 years.
Yeah, sure. Kyle, thanks for inviting me to be on here. I'm president and founder of Soilrite Consulting Services Incorporated in Shipman, Illinois. We're just north of the St. Louis metropolitan area. We work on roughly somewhere, depending on the day, somewhere between 80 and 100,000 acres scattered in 7 states now. We provide independent agronomic consulting services. We are, as the name says, we are soil. We try to help our clients get their soil right, and that has many facets to it. So we're kind of a soil health management company on steroids. That's what we do. I'm also a John Maxwell certified leadership trainer. Did that back in 2018 because I've always had have always leaned towards the Maxwell thought that you cannot grow others unless you're growing yourself. And so I've delved into the mission of helping grow myself so I can add value and help grow others.
Absolutely. And that's been quite a journey, I think, for both of us, hasn't it, Randy?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. And on a personal note, I've been married for I started my company in 1986, so we're getting ready to start our 34th year. My wife and I have also been married for 34 years, and we have 4 children and soon to be 8 grandchildren.
Yeah, I'll bet you can attest just like me, Randy. Those grandkids are a whole nother level, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're fun.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Randy, thank you for that. I'm going to have you speak into a couple other topics as we get further into this discussion. But here's our commitment to the group today. What is soil health? We're going to talk a little bit about that. In fact, on the next slide, I have something I want to read for anybody that's participating and they can't see the screen. I want to make sure and read how the NRCS views soil health, what their perspectives are. And then from there, we're going to talk a lot about it. I know Randy has a perspective on it. Obviously, I do. And so we're going to talk about what it is. And then we're going to talk about the truth about anaerobic conditions. This is something that I see so misunderstood in the irrigated market space. And it's easily understood because it happens in the root zone below the surface where we can't see things. And then ultimately, I want to create a plan to create and maintain healthy soil. And as you guys all know, creating a plan requires us to make sure we can create profit in that plan. It's got to be profitable. So we have to think about it from that perspective also. So here's a slide. I'm actually just going to read this, so just bear with me if you will. This actually describes what soil health is according to the NRCS here in the United States. And it says soil health, also referred to as soil quality, is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. This definition speaks to the importance of managing soil so that they are sustainable for future generations. To do this, we need to remember that soil contains living organisms that, when provided the basic necessities of life, such as food, shelter, and water, they perform functions required to produce food and fiber. Next paragraph says, only living things can have health. Key word, only living things can have health. So viewing soil as a living ecosystem reflects a fundamental shift in the way we care for our nation's soils. Soil isn't an inherent growing medium, an inert growing medium, but rather is teeming with billions of bacteria, fungi, and other microbes that are the foundation of an elegant symbiotic ecosystem. Soil is an ecosystem that can be managed to provide nutrients for plant growth, absorb and hold rainwater for use during dry periods, filter and buffer potential pollutants from leaving our fields, serve as a firm foundation for agriculture activities that provide habitat for soil microbes to flourish and diversify to keep the ecosystem running smoothly. So that gives us a good overall definition of how our government sees soil health. So it's kind of cool to think about that. It's this living ecosystem under the surface of the earth, what we can see. It's kind of like the human body, right? When we're looking at the soil profile, it's what's below the surface that has so much potential for life. It's just like our human bodies. When we look at the body, what we see on the surface is just the covering, it's just the skin, right? It's just the overlay. But what keeps us alive and creates health is below the surface. And this slide always just kind of blows me away when we start thinking about what is in that soil profile, what is inside of that earth below that surface. And when you start thinking about these microorganisms in a handful of soil, it's just crazy. I mean, when you pick up a handful of dirt, it's alive. There's life in there, and that life is to the tune of 4,000 to 8,000 pounds of microbes per acre in the top 6 inches of soil. Now, I'm sure there's people that have different opinions and different takes on that, but just imagine for a moment how much responsibility we have in the agriculture space to protect that, to preserve it, to be able to do our part to make sure that it's healthy. And the healthier it is, the more efficient it's going to be, the more it's going to give back to us. So when we think about this soil health component, it's a balanced living ecosystem. And that key word there, balance. Think about that for a moment. And I know Randy's going to talk into this in just a minute, because that balance component is extremely critical to crop production. I mean, think about it in the human space. If we're not feeling good, if we're not healthy on the inside, we don't produce well. And there's no way we can be at maximum efficiency if we're not healthy on the inside. And the soil's the same way. So balancing this ecosystem is really, really critical. So it's easy to think about this little graph, which we've all seen in college. I mean, all the way back into high school and FFA, I studied this stuff, right? It's real easy to think about all these perfect conditions. And when you're in a perfect condition, you're going to get perfect, or as near possible anyway, you're going to get near possible perfect results. However, we all know that we don't live in a perfect world. We don't live in this environment that is always spot on. There's going to be times when we're overly wet. We've all experienced that, when we have those really wet springs and it's just super, super wet. And I know in parts of the world where Randy comes from, they have trouble getting the corn planted, getting the beans planted sometimes because it is so wet. So wet conditions makes this whole soil structure imbalanced. And as it falls out of balance, how do we handle that? What do we do with it? And then there's also different conditions such as compaction. And when we're dealing with compaction issues, all of a sudden this balance that we had to start, it's not there anymore. So what do we do in that scenario? How do we begin to manage it? How do we begin to change it so that we can move conditions back to a good, healthy balance? Now, Randy, I'm going to have you speak into this a little bit because you have actually been studying the biology of soil. You have been heavily focused on soil health now for 30 plus years. So you have seen these conditions in both the non-irrigated acres where you guys are putting tile in the ground and things of that nature, which I've got one slide in here I'm going to have you talk about the results of tiling. But you've seen those conditions, Randy, where it's too wet. You've seen those conditions where it's too dry. Can you speak into that a little bit about the health of that bacteria, that those organisms in that soil in those different conditions? What's going on below that surface?
Yeah, below the surface in these, overwatered soils or waterlogged soils, I've experienced everything from the floods of a couple of years ago to, I'm a veteran of the '93 flood. And you see, if you go out on soils and they have that septic aroma, that really awful smell, that's organisms that have died, and that's their remains that you're smelling. And it takes air to rejuvenate those and get more biology, the right kind of biology going, because there is biology in the soil under these wet conditions, but it's the wrong kind. They're more detrimental to the soil than helpful. So we look at these conditions as, we look at the chemical, biological, and physical components of the soil, and we always try to handle those three components together, because you can't separate one out from the other. You have to, because they all affect each other. Over the last several decades, we've concerted a lot of effort. We've spent family fortunes on the chemical side of buying commercial fertilizers and such. And in many cases, we forgot that biological component, and the biological component is very, very crucial to these balances. The better microbiology you have in the soil, the less effect these three situations here have on a given farm. The excess water won't stay there quite as long. It'll be a longer time before you're in a water deficit. You have that balanced soil profile that can withstand some of these extremes better. And when you work on that, it's a really long process. We look at soil fertility, soil health. It's not an event, it's a process. And whatever you can do to to get yourself further down the road and benefiting your process of making your soil better incrementally, is because your soils don't get destroyed overnight, and they're not going to be rebuilt overnight.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point, Randy. And as we're thinking about the fact that it takes improvement, and you and I both know from the leadership space and focus in that area, improvement is something that happens over a long period of time. And to your point, when you look back at the last 40, 50 years in agriculture, we've done some amazing things. We really, really have. But in the last 10 to 15 years, as technology has come to the forefront, we've been able to see that maybe we could be doing things a little better, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe we've heard things that we just didn't know. And that's why I say a lot of the things that we've learned in the water space, it's unintentional. So damage has been created unintentionally. And that's one of the things that I noticed here. Let's talk just a brief moment about compaction and the situation of water, because Randy, you mentioned this need for air in the soil profile. And a lot of times when we're in this irrigation space and we're managing water, we're always talking about soil moisture content, which I think is actually the wrong discussion. We should be having more discussions about plant management, about how our plants are responding in those conditions, because that's what's going to give us the ROI is the plant. The soil moisture itself isn't really that critical. What's critical is what's the condition that's holding that moisture, right? Let's think about this for a moment, where we're looking at solid soil structure. That's what we're seeing there in the orange. Then we're seeing some water. That's our blue area. It's attached to those soil structures. And then we have airspace in there. And Randy, you mentioned how critical airspace is. And in those pie charts, in both situations, we end up losing airspace. It's the one piece that we often forget about. So one of the things that I've learned is I start to really hone in and think about it in the technology space. If I was to drop a sensor where I was reading soil moisture content in either one of these scenarios, I'm going to see similar moisture content readings most of the time. But Let's think about the plant trying to grow in that environment. The plant growing in picture one and the plant growing in picture two is going to be substantially different, right?
Mhm.
So when we're looking at sensors in the ground, let's take it a step further. Let's think about the crop that's growing in that soil, because the health of that soil, the condition of that soil, the environment that that root is in, is going to be in direct relationship to the results of the plant itself. So soil health and plant health are going to be go hand in glove. Is that correct, Randy?
Correct. Yeah, they go very much together. And one thing we forget, or it gets put to the side, is there are two functions to water. It's not just to add hydrogen. There are three components in crop production that we don't buy. That's carbon,
Mhm.
hydrogen, and oxygen. The two benefits of water in that component is it gets into the soil and it gives us H2O that gives us moisture to drive the system. The other component of the effects of water is it pulls new oxygen into the soil. Oxygen just doesn't enter the soil for kicks and giggles. It has to be pulled in by gravitational pull with the water. And so you have to have that or that oxygen exchange in the soil to have that proper balance of your air and water and carbon and all that stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, very, very good, Randy. Appreciate you feeding into that, because that is a key component. And one of the things that we've seen in oversaturated conditions is there's no space for that draw, right? There's just no
Right.
space for that draw of oxygen coming in. So we oftentimes miss that component in, especially in the irrigated space, when it's 110 degrees outside, the wind is blowing, and we're got to turn the water on, we're going to go. But at times that plant may be shut down, and we may be adding, insult to injury at that point in time.
Right. You have to
So
have that oxygen transfer.
yep, yep. And so as we start thinking about sensors and we start thinking about soil health, I'm always looking at the sensor from a whole nother perspective than just moisture content. Moisture content is just a piece of what we're measuring. There's just so many other things we want to look at. So one of the things I've learned about sensors is I compare them oftentimes to a light bulb. A sensor is calibrated to a standard calibration that works the same in any environment that it's put in. So you can think about sensors as they'd have an I don't care attitude, like a light bulb. It doesn't care where you plug it in. If it has the right amount of power, it is going to send out 100 watts, 60 watts, or whatever it is. And sensors are a lot the same way. Sensors don't care what kind of soil type they're in. They don't care about the soil structure. They don't care about compaction. The sensor itself doesn't care. It's unbiased. So that gives us a standard that we can work with. Okay. The other component is sensors are always going to tell the truth. They're just going to give us factual information, truthful information as of the depth of root. They're going to talk about available water in the soil, because the sensors are just going to tell us what is there. It's not going to give us a whole lot of other information that we're going to get to in a little bit. That requires analytics. That requires us the ability to think into the data that the sensors are sending to us. But these are things that the sensors are going to tell us that have a direct correlation to soil health. And that's one thing that we so often miss when we're talking about the need for sensors in agriculture. So I want to share with you now some spaces, and this is a lot of different details, and this is not everything. This is just a few details where sensors work when models and humans can't. And in the last several years, modeling has been this huge draw, this huge push. And while models may have a place in agriculture, if you want to get the most out of your soil, and if you want to truly, truly manage soil health, a model is lacking a lot I mean, a tremendous amount. I mean, let's think about this for a minute. Models cannot account for soil structure. They have to take an estimate. When you go and plug that information in, you're estimating. Even if you can estimate compaction, you may be able to go out and you may, put a tension meter in the soil to see how tight your compaction is. I get all that, but it doesn't tell you exactly how the roots are going to respond in those situations. It's not giving you the true plant activity in that situation. So when we start thinking about models and we start thinking about even our agronomists, and we have some amazing agronomists out here, Randy being one of them, there are just things as human beings we don't know. And the sensors being live in the field, pulling data every 30 minutes, I'll show you here in a minute, it will tell us things that simply make us better. And one of the things that Randy said, and I really appreciate the way he said it, is we have to think about improvement. We didn't start having these problems in our soil, just didn't happen overnight. And it's not going to happen overnight that we improve it. So even though these things are here, the sensors can help us identify these environments. The last two are huge: genetics and soil health. Genetics in our soil, in our plants right now, have been modified and tweaked and adjusted, and has helped make us profitable. Let's just say it for what it is. It's helped make us profitable and deal with these challenges in agriculture. It's been awesome to see how farmers have been able to use that. Now, as we start to think about it, though, if we're changing the base structures, those DNA, if you will, of some of those plants, how is that going to how should we be managing those plants different? And those are some things that we have learned. We're not going to have time to jump into all of that today, but I want you to think into all these different soil types. And when you're out there growing a crop, I don't care if it's alfalfa, if it's sugar beets, I don't care if it's carrots or onions or watermelon, I don't care what you're growing. If you're growing in different soil conditions, how are those conditions different? Now, this right here indicates the amount of water that each of these different soil types can hold. But in different situations, in different health situations in that soil, how are these plants going to respond differently in that scenario? How are the corn, the soybeans, the watermelon, how are they all going to respond differently if those soils are not healthy? So you may not be able to access all that water. You may not be able to do what you really want to do with that water. So when we start thinking about this management of the water to manage soil health, and we start moving into that space, we want to remember how much water is always moving. This is what makes it so hard to manage in season. But in season, when the fertilizer's already been put on, the seeds are already planted, the crop is already growing, there's so many things that a farmer cannot manage, but water is one thing in irrigation that we can manage. We can manage it to a huge extent. So in season profit management is going to happen with the water. And we have to take into account the fact that all these water conditions are changing all the time. Water's moving in all different directions. So if that's the case, how do we truly manage it? This picture, I love this picture. And Randy, I stole this picture from you. And the next picture, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about some results of tiling. But this picture is something that we've probably all seen. Now, if some of you are from Texas or New Mexico that are on this webinar, you don't see this very often, more than likely. But you've probably seen some of these conditions under the center pivot. And when you see these types of conditions, we want to think about not what do we see from the surface. From the surface, it doesn't look good, but think about what's happening below that surface. What's that environment look like below the surface? Because there's a huge amount of profit tied directly to that root zone below that surface. And Randy, this is a slide that I stole from one of your presentations. And I know that you and I have talked quite a bit about tiling in your part of the world versus irrigation timing and irrigation quality and management quality and irrigation in our part of the world here. Can you share with us just a little bit of why these yields are so substantially different before and after tiling? Give us a little of the why behind that, if you would.
Yeah, that's one of the problems we have here in the more central, here in Illinois and Indiana, Ohio are very similar. We have a problem with excess water more often than not, for at least in the springtime. Well, whenever you have major rain events in the spring, our soils get wet. Here in Southern Illinois, our soils have a very difficult time shedding water, and it's a very light timber soil. It won't absorb it either, so it just sets. And so, with the advent of system tiling over the last decade or so, there's been a lot of money invested in tiling systems to help uh, get the excess water off of the field. We feel excess water is always excess water, and you have to get rid of that excess water from the bottom up. Water runs, it's lazy, it goes down in a meandering way. Then the water table, we're actually draining the water table versus trying to drain the top part. So you alleviate that water stress, or you're able to drain the land so you can get planted earlier or in better conditions. And then that plant has more oxygen, more availability of nutrients and such. And that's where we're seeing this cause effect happen, to where yields have increased by 40 to 80 bushels per acre, just because we are draining the land. For some of you out west, I work out in Nebraska, South Dakota, Kansas, and such. That is totally foreign to you. You want to keep as much water as you can, but that everybody's different. So your soils are different, and those types of things. So yeah, that dynamic has occurred because we are creating better soil to seed contact, being able to plant earlier, and that's what's causing these higher yield jumps.
Yeah, yeah. That's some good stuff, Randy, because I've shared this slide with before. So if you guys have been on here before, you've seen this. But when we're thinking about those different water holding capacities, those different soils, we know there's an area that's going to get too dry. We know when we go to that side, it's not going to be profitable. So we try to stay away from that, especially in the irrigated space. However, this next component where we're too wet, that's been probably one of the biggest learns for me. And it was even on our own farm. I was farming in Arcadia, Nebraska. I grew up farming there and farmed there for a lot of years. And I did not realize until we started using sensors in our own operation just how much we were missing for opportunity to produce yield under irrigation. Now, granted, we didn't have the situations, Randy, like you guys do sometimes where you run short on water because we have it. We had plenty of water. But what we were doing was hurting ourselves with too much water unintentionally. We didn't realize that. And as I begin to really study and learn how sensors work, I've realized there's actually a pretty small, pretty small region that we need to manage in these profiles, this pretty small space, if you will, for us to manage the right amount of water. And all of these different soils being different, we want to be able to focus on what's best for that crop. And over the years, soil health is critical. And this has always led me to the question of what's the real cost of guessing. And Randy, you just showed us an example of some substantial yield improvements by removing the water out of the soil. Well, if we're actually causing some of those situations, which I'm going to show you here in a second, when we're causing some of those saturated anaerobic type conditions, it's really on us. If we're pushing start with our irrigation system and creating that environment in the soil profile, we can't blame God like you do in your part of the world where you're trying to get rid of the rainwater. If we cause that environment with the center pivot or with our drip irrigation, that's kind of on us, right? So the question that I've had to ask over the last several years is what is the real cost of guessing? And that's leading me now to how do we use these sensors? How do we use these sensors to take that guesswork out of play? This is a quote that I've used for a long time, is to make improvement the priority. And when we're looking out here in precision agriculture, it's nice to think and believe that we can just make these huge changes overnight, and it's just gonna, we're gonna be, super successful just in an instant. It's not realistic. Soil health, increased crop production, increased profit management is a process. It is a continuous process. And the more you invest in yourself, the more you're going to improve in that process. So when I think about ROI, and most people call it return on investment, I've learned in agriculture to focus on the return on the input, which means, think about our seed, our fertilizer, our water, the chemicals that we use, anything that we're putting into that field. If I'm going to increase profit, I have to increase the return on that input. So every single input I've learned to measure. I measure all the seed count, the ROI on the seed count. I measure the pounds of product going in and the ROI, the return on that product going into that soil. And focusing in on the improvement side of it has given us the ability to be better. So we have to ask the questions. When we start thinking about sensors, we start thinking about going into that root zone. Can sensors make us better? Absolutely. They can make us better. They're a major tool in moving us towards that improvement space. If you're not familiar with how sensors work, the sensors that we use and we're going to always recommend are going to have, they're going to go at least 2, if not 3 foot down into the soil profile. I want to have a soil sensor that has connected sensors all the way down through that soil structure. So if you see here, I want to be able to measure everything that's taken place in that root zone. I just don't want to leave room for error. If we can measure it, measure it. So that's what we do here. And when that sensor pulls a reading, and you think about all those little yellow outlined areas there, it's measuring all of the water down through that column of soil. That is huge, because now as the plants begin the process of pulling that water out of the soil profile, that sensor goes off, it's pulling water out of that soil profile, it's telling a story. And that story is priceless. That story is going to tell us a lot about our health of that soil. It's going to tell us a lot about the quality of our water. It's going to tell us a lot about the quality of our root system. There's a story being told at every single one of those sensor levels. And that's why I recommend this sensor, because if we can measure every single reading, every 30 minutes, it's like being in the doctor for an entire week, being in the hospital, and they're literally just pulling off, your heart monitor all week long, pulling in your oxygen levels. When you're in the hospital, you're being measured all the time. And that's really what we're doing with these sensors in the root zone, is we're measuring them all the time. So I'm just going to give you a real brief rundown on what's happening in this profile. And this is one of the graphs that I worked with last year. Brand new farmer, was struggling to, with some confidence issues in sensors. So I'm going to show you what he learned last year. This right here, when we're looking at the top 3 sensors, which is our 2-inch, our 6-inch level of the profile, and then our 10-inch level of the profile. In the top 10 inches of the profile, we had a lot of water use. And in that area, the water uptake indicated transpiration. There's transpiration taking place at that level. The plants are drawing in water and using it. However, there was a situation below that where we were dealing with percolation, and that's losing money. If we're putting on the water that's going below our root zone and we're losing it out the bottom, 2 things are taking place. Number one, we're too close to field capacity. And in this situation, we were actually at saturation. We were saturating the soil every single time we irrigated. and that just wasn't healthy on this crop. So of course the grower learned a substantial amount here as we went through this first season. But when we're in these situations, it is costing us money. And not only money, it's costing us yield. And that's the one thing we can't see. So how do we begin to really measure that? Well, let's think about it. The way that we put this information together and how you can begin using this information to measure soil health is follow the lines of the sensor. Follow the story that the sensor is telling you. This is what we would call a sum graph. It's the full point, indicates every irrigation event that takes place. Anytime that moisture content increases, something has added that moisture to the profile somewhere in the profile. If you're managing drip irrigation, that's going to happen in the lower profile or in your mid-level profile. If you're managing center pivot, that's going to happen from the top down. If you're managing rain events, you're going to manage that from the top down. So all the information on this graph is telling a story. Okay. Now, these little stair steps that you see in this graph, there's a lot of story being told there. We want to be measuring daytime water change. How much is that water changing throughout the day? But we're also going to be measuring how much it changes at night. Because if that moisture content is changing at night, and remember that sensor pulls a reading every 30 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you leave it in, say, alfalfa, it'll pull that reading 365 days a year. So it's pulling a reading every 30 minutes. Ask your agronomist what it would cost to have him pull a sample every 30 minutes. That's going to be crazy, right? This is like having a full-time agronomist in your field every 30 minutes giving you information about your soil profile. But if that graph is showing a decrease in moisture content at night and the plants are not transpiring, photosynthesis is not taking place, there's something else happening. That's an indicator of leaching. That's an indicator we're too wet in that soil profile. That's an indicator that we're damaging soil biology. We're damaging soil health. We have to be thinking into that, because if we're going to be really good at it, then we want to be measuring that to that level. We want to improve that soil health. Randy, I know you got to take off, my friend. We're going to be wrapping up here real shortly. So thank you for investing time if you're still with us.
Sure,
and
yeah.
I look forward to connecting with you again here, my friend.
All righty. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Randy.
Service anytime.
You bet. Thank you. So my friends, those are some of the things that we're thinking about, that we're working on as sensors are pulling data. We want to know, we want to be jumping in here and keeping in mind the soil health. So this graph is so much more than just a moisture graph. It is telling us a story about whether or not we're improving, maintaining, or damaging the health of our soil with water. And that is just so critical. Now, as we begin to wrap up, I want to introduce you to IRIS. Now, these graphs, as I just shared with you, there's so many different stories that you can pull out of these sensor graphs, but they're challenging. Some of these graphs, when you get into data analytics, it can be a little complicated, especially for a producer that's running a multi-million-dollar business and they've got all their different people running 1,000 different directions. It's complicated for a farmer to be able to connect to all of this stuff, and it requires a lot of time and it's labor intensive. These are all things that have been a big challenge in the industry as we start thinking about the soil sensor market and the soil moisture management market. And cost to value, sensors are not going to be the lowest cost thing on the farm. They have a cost associated with them, especially if they come with a service package. So how do you pay for all this? And then when a farmer starts seeing all these graphs and they see all this information, as cool as it is, and as much as they desire it, it's hard to envision this across the whole farm. It's hard to envision a sensor in every field. It's hard to envision a sensor in every crop. And if they don't move to that level, though, if they're not full farm programs, Now they're going to have sensors in some fields, they're going to have manual management in other fields. It's requiring two management programs. That actually increases the stress level for a lot of farmers. So these are just a few of the things that we've seen in the last 15 years in soil sensor management and the precision ag space that goes along with the irrigated marketplace. So for me, I've always known that there has to be a better way. And that better way is Iris. And here again, I forgot to change those pictures. They are very, very cloudy. This is Iris. This is what Iris looks like today. Iris is a very, very simple dashboard that takes all that information in those graphs and pulls it into a very simple dashboard for our producers, for our agronomists. This thing is going to be moving towards an agronomy tool that is made for farmers to make very quick, very informed decisions without having to learn all those analytical details in the back end. Let me run through it real quick. Reading on these graphs from left to right, we're going to know how much is available in the soil profile. We're going to see that instantly. We're also able to see what's the root depth. This is an automated calculation as those sensors are starting to pull water, or the plants are pulling water out of that profile, and those sensors are reading that drop, that water change. We're going to measure where are the roots in that soil profile. How deep is the root system? We're going to measure that. And then every night at midnight, this platform updates with new root depth management. So as the plants are growing in the early stages of life, we're measuring that root development. So we know where the roots are at. And then we got to think about that transpiration component. How much water are those plants pulling out of the ground? We want to make sure that we're not overwatering again, remember? So it's not just evaporation we're thinking about. It's not E and T. We want to think about that transpiration. I want to know how much are the plants drawing out of the ground. So putting that sensor into the root zone, I'm going to be a lot better at measuring plant transpiration. That's a huge piece for me because I want to know that when I refill, which comes into this next stage, when I refill that profile, I don't want to overfill it. That's what we've been talking about. Overfilling that profile, getting into that anaerobic condition is going to hurt our soil health. It's going to hurt our soil biology. We don't want to hurt it. We want to improve it. So this platform we've created to be extremely simple, reads from left to right, reads from top to bottom. If you want to see a graph, we wanted you to be able to get to it with one click. One click. We wanted you to be able to see who's managing that field with one click. We wanted you to be able to get access to all that back-end information simply with one click. That's what we've created here. Give you the ability to see this information in just a very short amount of time. You as a producer, you as an agronomist, you need to be able to scroll through a massive number of fields in a short amount of time and be able to say, yes, this is what's taking place. So the view that you're seeing right now is the view from an iPad. That's what you would see on your iPad for all the fields that you would work with that have sensors in them. That's what we moved Iris to. And I just learned from our developers the other day, this is going to continue to improve. They've got some new updates now that are coming into this, and it's going to look even better, going to make it more intuitive, give us the ability to put comments in there, and we'll be able to take pictures of when we're in the field scouting. We can put pictures in there that go along and correlate with this. That's all stuff that's coming down the road. I'm not going to tell you when it's going to be here because who knows? It's software development, but that's the direction we're moving. So think about how simple this would be for you. Now, as we start thinking about wrapping this up today, I want to go back and really, really hone in on that soil health component. At TWS Consulting, which is our company at Kylan Hunt and Company, this is one of our companies. TWS is Transformational Water Solutions. That's what it stands for. And we have a passion for transforming lives and preserving legacies. The one thing that I've learned in the last 30 years is that we have made mistakes in water management and agriculture. They're unintentional mistakes. Nobody did these things on purpose. But now that we have information, We are learning about some of the mistakes. So our job, what we're passionate about, is helping farmers transform their lives, transform their processes, transform their systems to preserve their legacy. We do that with continuous improvement. That's how we get there. Continuous improvement, true leadership is going to happen over the course of time. Transformation is a process. It doesn't just happen overnight. And my heart, I come from small farm in central Nebraska. I grew up on a dairy farm. I believe in all of my being that farmers are the nucleus of our nation. That's who they are. They are the strength. They're the core. They're the power of our country. And when I look at some of the best leaders in the history of our world, they came from agriculture. And I believe that with all my heart. So the people that I work with today, we're growing, we're equipping, we're developing leaders in the agriculture space for that reason. So ultimately, everything that I do is about equipping and empowering producers. The question for you, though, is how do you want to get involved? I don't know where you're from. I don't know what role you have in agriculture today. I don't know. But I know that if you want to be involved, you most definitely can. And the legacy that you have to ask is, are you a user? Are you a farmer? If you're a farmer, you want to be able to connect to Iris. You want to be able to think into your soil health. You want to be able to measure what's happening in that root zone so that you can maintain and sustain your soil health and improve it if need be. If it's already good, we don't want to mess it up, right? We want to be able to just maintain that and keep our plants producing at the highest level. So maybe you're a producer today, or maybe you're an agronomist and you want to be working as a dealer. You want to be offering an Iris platform to your producers. Maybe it's something that you want to be able to serve a producer with in this space. Be able to take the burden of bringing technology to the farm. Take that burden off of your producers. You're willing to you're willing to take that burden. You're willing to take that burden on and be able to bring this type of value to your producer. That's what our dealers are doing today. And we've got dealers now that are starting to grow and develop all over the United States. So we're really, really excited about what those guys are doing at that level. Now, there's a very unique opportunity for just a handful of people, a service provider opportunity. It's not going to be available to everybody. It's going to be available only to those that are really, really passionate about building, a business that's high level service. And those are your opportunities to get involved with us. If you want to connect with Iris, that software platform, if you want to learn the processes of improving soil health, of identifying soil health conditions, identifying how your plants are responding, how you can make it better and be more profitable, I want you to reach out to me directly. Reach out to me directly. When you get in touch with me, I can get you in touch with someone in your area that can help you learn the process, learn the system of getting started to improve soil health. Those individuals will also talk to you about price. I don't talk about price in these situations. I want them to bring the best value to you at the best price. And that's the whole deal. Right now, there's a lot of programs out there that are dirt cheap, okay? Dirt cheap, but they're going to use models. They're going to try to take sensors out of play. They're going to do a lot of different things that just aren't going to bring the value that we talked about today. So what we want to be able to do is bring a profit program to your operation. So if you want to be able to reach into any one of those different areas of input, of using this system, whether you're a user, you want to be a dealer, or you want to consider the service provider option, if you want to be involved in some space, reach out to me. Reach out to me either at water@kylanhunt.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm probably most active. If you reach out to me, I will get you in touch with a dealer or with a service provider that can assist you to getting started this year in your operation. So my friends, thank you again for taking the time to be here today. Thank you for jumping into this. I just want to thank each of you personally for investing your lunchtime with us, investing this hour with us, And I am so looking forward to one day when we get past all the stuff going on in our world. Maybe we'll get the chance to meet face to face and we'll get a chance to connect at a whole nother level. So, my friends, go out and make it an amazing day for you, an amazing day for your family. And until we meet again, God bless.